Well, thank you all for coming out tonight and not staying home to watch the gubernatorial debate and look at Scott Walker's bald spot. I'm delighted to welcome my friend and writing colleague, Gail Sheehy, to Madison.
I'm so thrilled to be here.
And Gail and I have trod some of the same ground over the years, particularly when it came to the Clintons. But she was famous long before that, one of the great writers of this era, who went through newspapers to some of the most exciting magazines, New York Magazine in its prime, and has written for Vanity Fair for many decades now. And her most famous book is Passages, which was ranked by the Library of Congress as one of the top most influential books of the modern era. And we're here tonight to talk to her about her latest book, which, as I understand it, was originally going to be titled My Passages, which is now the subtitle.
Right.
But I always struggle with titles of books, and I think that daring is the perfect title for this. And why don't you start by telling us about that word and what it means to you?
Oh, thank you, David. I'm so thrilled to be here with my colleague, David. It's a real honor to have such an illustrious interviewer. It took me 3 years to excavate my life for a memoir, and I use that verb intentionally because it's like digging between your ribs, and some of it is painful and some of it is joyful. And one of the nicest parts of it was discovering or rediscovering people who were very important in my life, who shaped me, that I hadn't really thought about in that way. So it makes me more and more thankful for the life that I've had. But in any case, it wasn't until I was nearly finished the book that I recognized the theme of my life, and that was daring. And it sort of surprised me. It's funny, I don't think we don't take time to sit down and put together the pieces of our lives and our multiple lives and to try to draw some thread through it. So I would recommend that you write a memoir when you get into your 60s or 70s, very illuminating. So daring, and then what does daring mean? Well, daring is taking the less traveled road. It's perhaps giving voice to some people who don't have a voice, daring to speak up for them. It's when you're older and gray, saying, I'm still here. Many different aspects of daring. And what I'm trying to do as I travel around with the book is to excite women to be more daring, particularly younger women. And I have a website about that called Sheehy Daring Project. And I'm inviting people, encouraging people to send in their stories of daring, just a daring moment or a daring episode, particularly when one is younger, and it kind of catapults you ahead to be a bit more daring throughout the rest of your life.
One of those people who had an early influence on you is one of my favorite characters in your book, your grandma Gladys, who encouraged you to both be daring and probably set you on the road to being a writer.
Oh, absolutely. Grandma Gladys lived with us. She had been a very protected young woman living on Lower Fifth Avenue and always being driven in horse and carriages by her brother. And when she was widowed, she went to work, learned how to drive, went to work every day for the next 25 years, was really a dynamo. And she bought me my first typewriter when I was 7 years old. And it was so thrilling to actually make that thwack, to actually make words yourself. I don't even think it's as much fun for kids when they get to computers because they don't make any sound. But boy, that typewriter really let you know you were putting something down on paper. And so we lived in a suburb in Westchester, about 45 minutes from New York City. And Grandma and I used to listen on Saturday mornings to a show called Grand Central Station. It was Grand Central Station, crossroads of a million private lives. And I couldn't wait to find out, what were those private lives like? They couldn't be anything like the boring people who lived in a suburb. So one day I asked Grandma if she would keep my secret if I took a train in to New York and went to Grand Central. So she kept my secret, she gave me the money, and I was like 9, 10 years old, and my legs were too small to even reach the high steps on the old washboard trains, so somebody would have to give me a push-up, and I get on the train, 45 minutes later, I run up the steps around the big balcony looking down on the main terminal, and then I would watch the people, and I'd see a man with a big Borsalino hat, and he'd come together with a woman with dark glasses, and they would be secretly talking, and I'd say, they must be communists. Write down, start a story about them, and make up all kinds of stories to go with these fantastic-looking people. And then I'd get home, take my bike, get back before dinner. Nobody would know the difference, and I would be sitting at my typewriter writing until the middle of the night. So that was my start as a writer. Although I never thought you could make a living at it, and many times in my career I've had that question too.
So have we all.
Yeah.
And then a few decades later, you arrive in New York City in the newspaper world of 1963, when there was the New York Sun and Telegram and the New York Herald Tribune, newspapers that probably many people in this room have never heard of because they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And the whole atmosphere of newspapers then was so incredibly different from anything of today. Talk about sort of what it was like to go into the, as you called it, the estrogen zone.
Well, there were 5 newspapers in New York then, and they were all very competitive, so they were very, very good. And I had been sort of exiled to Rochester with my first husband, putting him through medical school. And when we got back to New York, I couldn't wait to work for the Herald Tribune, because that was where all these wonderful journalists were working, and new kinds of journalism were coming out. So the only place I could get a job was in the women's department, because I was a girl, right? And there weren't any girls in journalism at that time. Well, I got tired of that after the first year, and I snuck down the back stairs from the flamingo pink, precincts of the women's department, and down the back stairs and across into enemy territory, the city room, where the testosterone zone, where it was only men in white shirts and black ties. I was on a mission. I had to get to see Clay Felker, who was incubating New York Magazine in the pages of the New York Herald Tribune and doing a different kind of journalism. And I could get fired, because if my editor knew that I was taking my best story to another editor on the paper, she would have thrown a fit. So I'm walking across the city room, and I see this black Irish curls and stubby fingers banging on a typewriter. It's Jimmy Breslin, who was notorious for writing about bail bondsmen and kneecappers and prostitutes and pimps and all kinds of exciting worlds. And then I would see Tom Wolfe with his long silky hair and Virginia gentleman. And I had actually bumped into him in the elevator once, and I said, "What's it like writing for Clay Felker?" He said, "Well," he said, "the Herald Tribune is the main Tijuana bull ring for competitive male feature writers, but you have to be brave." And I thought, well, I'm little and I'm not a man, but I'm brave, I think. So I refused to be deterred. I get to Clay Felker's office, and the first thing I hear about is his voice, which was notorious. And he's saying, "What do you mean you don't have my reservation? Isn't this the Four Seasons? I have my regular table there in the pool room. I'm bringing a senator tonight. My wife's opening on Broadway." What? I'm thinking, I can't talk to this man. I mean, he's got all these famous people in his life. And finally, I screw up my courage and I say, "Mr. Felker? Clay, come on in. Where'd you come from?" "The estrogen zone." He laughed and said, "Well, what have you got for me?" Well, I knew I had 30 seconds to, spill out my story to keep his attention. So I'm getting all tongue-tied, and I say, "Well, it's about these dorky guys who want to attract beautiful girls to sit on their beach blanket, and they're offering them free rent in their house, and they want to attract other pretty girls to stay with them, and so they're having specimen viewing parties, and they're using these girls like flypaper. Did you go to a specimen viewing party? Yeah, of course. Well then, write it just like you told it to me. Write it as a scene. We'll call it the flypaper people. Well, this was like totally new. What do you mean, write journalism as a scene? That wasn't being done. And so I was thrilled, and it was my first plunge into what we came to call the new journalism.